It's me, Tony B, and we've got another debate for you tonight. The 37th District Position 1 debate. This will be taking place between Sharon Tomiko Santos, the incumbent, and John Stafford. Welcome. This is part of our Community Election Connection Campaign 2020 Engage and Activate. Tonight, again, we are featuring a debate for the elected position of 37th District Representative Position 1. This is a 4-year term. The candidates, again, Sharon Tomiko Santos and the challenger, John Stafford. And we've been doing this now almost since the beginning of October, and we'll continue on through the rest of the week. We have had congressional debates, legislative debates, state executive office debates, state judicial office debates like the one we're going to have tomorrow for the Superior Court Position 13. And also we have pro and con debates on the measures like the one we're having tomorrow on Referendum 90, sex education in schools. That's a big one. We'll have representatives here from the pro side, and we'll also have representatives from the con side. All of this is to give you more information on your vote. Your vote is important, it matters, and most of all, it's yours. We'll provide you with the information on issues. Our moderators do a wonderful job of that, and hopefully provide you with the knowledge to vote for the candidate who you feel most aligns with your concerns. And our moderators for the debate tonight, Mr. Dane Sherman. Dane, how are you?
Great. Just finished a long day of classes, so great.
Yes, and you know what, Dane? Should I call you Dane or Lucas?
I'm good with either.
Okay. Dane, as he kind of mentioned there, Dane is one of our instructors for our Student Election Connection. We're offering courses and workshops to teach high school students about the importance of the vote, how to vote, what it means to vote, who the candidates are, what the candidates do in their elected positions, and just a phenomenal course, and they've been doing a great job. Dane is a Seattle resident, but he's currently at Notre Dame. He studies philosophy and psychology as a freshman at the University of Notre Dame. Dane lost both his parents early in life, which inspired him to improve mental health policy and support those affected. In 2017, he founded The Other Six, a nonprofit focused on helping those affected by a death by suicide. He's since served on many boards and commissions throughout the King County and Washington area, specifically focused on behavioral health and recovery. Dane, welcome as a moderator. Also moderating tonight, you can hear him on Mondays at 6:30 with Edwin Bailey. He goes by the name Dupe. We are going to be calling him Rick DuPree tonight. He's a 30-year veteran, having served as executive producer and co-host for KJR Radio when the station made the transition from music to sports talk in 1989. And proud to say he is currently our sports director and lead play-by-play announcer here at Rainier Avenue Radio for our coverage of Washington State prep sports, including football, basketball. The University of Washington alum has spent most of his professional career in the nonprofit sector, primarily working with youth, but he also served as the director of player resources for the Seattle Sonics and the Storm. The final 4 years, the Sonics were in Seattle from 2004 to 2008. Rick is currently in his 9th year as the Director of Community Engagement at Seattle Academy. Again, the native Seattleite has lived in Columbia City for over 30 years and is a proud resident of the 37th District. Mr. DuPree, how are you?
Yes, sir. I am well, honored to be here and honored to be moderating with Mr. Sherman. He graduated from Seattle Academy last year, and it is just exciting for me to see someone his age, our young people, because these are the leaders of tomorrow, and to be as engaged as he is, and also honored to be here with John Stafford and Sharon Tomiko Santos, who I have followed for many, many years. So good to see you both as well. But Tony, excited to be here and a part of this and just doing a great job.
All right. I am going to read the rules here in a second. Let me get some paperwork ready that I'm going to need. There we go. Okay. I'm going to give you the rules now, and let me make sure I have our candidates here because I'm going to give them the opportunity for opening statements. Ms. Santos, are you with us?
Yes, sir, I am.
All right. And Mr. Stafford, are you there?
I am. Thank you.
Okay. The reading of the rules. Each candidate will get a 2-minute opening statement and closing statement. Each candidate will be allotted 2 minutes to respond to the moderator's questions with an opportunity for a 30-minute rebuttal if one of our moderators decides that they want to do a follow-up question. Halfway through, after the break, each candidate will have 15 seconds to ask their opponent a question. The asked candidate will be given 1 minute to respond, and then the candidate that asked the question will be given a 30-second rebuttal. And so now it is time for the coin flip. Of course, the way that we do this is it's kind of confined here, so I don't actually flip a coin. I do that in advance, and I write down the coin the side of the coin flip. And I've done that. Ms. Santos, would you like to call heads or tails?
Heads.
All right, here we go. It is indeed heads. So what this does is it gives you the opportunity to go first, or you can defer and let your opponent go first, which essentially means whoever goes first will do their opening statement first. Then when we get back from break, that same individual will ask their question first. And then when we do closing statements, they will again go first. So would you like to go first, or would you like to defer and have Mr. Stafford go first?
Thank you. I will defer.
Okay. Mr. Stafford, you will be going first, and we are going to get into this not now, right now. You will have 2 minutes for your opening statement, and you are now on the clock.
All right. Good evening. Thank you for hosting the event tonight. My name is John Stafford. I'm a candidate for state representative in the 37th Legislative District. Position 1, I'll start with my background. I am highly involved in our community. I'm a 20-year resident of the 37th Legislative District. I live on Beacon Hill. I'm a high school history teacher. I currently work for Mercer Island High School. Prior to that, I worked for 15 years full-time as a substitute teacher for Seattle Public Schools. During this time, I worked for every single one of the schools in Seattle, in the Seattle district. This is all a second career. In my first career, I was a partner for a management consulting firm in Washington, D.C. for over a decade. So I've had careers in education and in business. I'm on the executive board of the 37th District Democrats and have been for 5 years. I'm also a precinct committee officer. I'm involved with 3 climate change organizations. I'm on the steering committee for the South Seattle Climate Action Network. I am the treasurer for the Environment and Climate Caucus of the Washington State Democratic Party, and I'm a member of the 37th Legislative District Environment and Climate Caucus. I've also written and had published 40 articles on public policy for the South Seattle Emerald. Thus, I'm highly involved in our community and in many ways. Regarding my platform, I have 4 priorities. The first, we must avoid an austerity approach, that is painful cuts to social programs in the upcoming budget negotiations in Olympia. We must protect our most vulnerable residents. Second, we need a new progressive source of taxation. Our lowest income residents pay 6 times the rate in taxation as our highest income residents. This is unreasonable and needs to change. I support a capital gains tax. We must address the imminent threat of climate change with high-impact, low-cost programs, and we must address the demands for racial justice by dealing with the underlying societal inequities that give rise to them. And thank you again for having me tonight.
Thank you. And yeah, just again, so that you both know, at 10 seconds, I'll be letting you know it's 10 seconds. For those of you who are watching, you may see a timer on the screen. What we do know is that if you're watching, depending on the stream you're watching, there might be a delay. And so that's why I just make sure and tell the time. And if you're listening, well, that's all you're going to hear. There's nothing to see. You're just going to hear. Well, we're going to go ahead and move forward now, again, to the incumbent, Ms. Santos. And you are now on the clock for your opening statement, 2 minutes.
Well, thank you so very much. And I'm so happy to be here joining all of you at Rainier Avenue Radio. My name is Sharon Tomiko Santos, and I am running for re-election for position 1 state representative in the 37th Legislative District. I am proud to have served and represented the 37th Legislative District for 22 years. We are the most diverse district in the state, racially, ethnically, religiously, economically, linguistically. In the last census in 2010, more than 63% of us identified as other than non-Hispanic white. In other words, we are one of the few majority-minority districts in the state. We have about 27% of our population is API, 23% is Black, and more than 1 in every 4 persons in our district was born in another country. I'm proud to represent this district because I'm a product of this district and the people and the communities that raised me, that instilled my values, that shaped my worldview, and that informed my priorities both in life and in the legislature. I'm the daughter of an immigrant clergyman and of a special education teacher who was unjustly incarcerated because of her ethnic background and the way she looked. I'm also a free and reduced price lunch kid who attended elementary, junior high school, and high school in this district. And I qualified for a federal anti-poverty program that was called Summer Youth Employment, which led me to the doors of the Central Area Motivation Program to engage in community action projects. These and other formative experiences are the foundation for my passion and my commitment to equity, opportunity, and justice, the platform on which I have built a lifetime record of advocacy and achievement. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to all of you tonight.
And we are now going to get underway. I would like to remind our moderators that I'm sure there will be times when you will need to add context to your question. Just try to remember to be as concise as possible so that we have enough time to hear from our candidates and hear as many questions as we possibly can. Having said that, let's begin. Dane, you will go first, and your question will initially be to candidate Stafford. And go ahead, Dane, fire away.
Awesome. Okay. So, Mr. Stafford, COVID has upended our education system for everyone. But as we know, it has exacerbated inequalities with well-to-do districts and well-to-do families having lots of resources with access to quality Wi-Fi, a quiet place to do work, tutoring resources. These can all be barriers to getting a quality education, as well as many families relying on services and support such as food, healthcare, and libraries for school. Mr. Stafford, with your perspective as a public school teacher, how do you see this problem and how will you address it as a representative for the 37th Legislative District?
2 minutes.
All right. So obviously this is a very important, very relevant question. And I do have quite a bit of experience dealing with this, as this topic is a topic of much discussion at my school and elsewhere. So you're right. There are equity differentials in terms of how the education process is playing out. It is lower income and minority students, also special education students that have a higher propensity to not have the requisite infrastructure to be learning as much as they should be at this time. So to deal with that, I do think we need to, there's sort of a mix of short-term and longer-term programs. So one of the things we're doing that I do think makes sense is starting to bring in to the school students with that are more disadvantaged with respect to the learning process in learning pods or learning groups, so that they benefit from on-site learning as opposed to the other students who are learning through the online environment. So that's an important part, is to start to bring in segmented populations actually onto the school campuses. A second issue is, of course, making sure that people that are off-site without access to internet access have access to internet access and devices. So that's critical. And then a third piece is in the longer term, I certainly support, I'll say medium term, moving internet access to become a public utility so that it's ubiquitously available. And that will be increasingly important as we move towards more telework, telemedicine. It will deal with disparities in socioeconomic conditions within districts and also between urban and rural areas. So those are amongst my proposals for dealing with the differential impacts of COVID on the K-12 system.
And
Thank
that's
you.
time. Thank you. And Ms. Santos, same question. Would you like the question repeated?
No, but thank you for offering. I'm happy to begin now. Thank you so much for that question. As you know, I chair the House Education Committee, and unlike most years, the legislature, as far as I'm concerned, has not stopped meeting since the legislature adjourned. And as the House Education Chair, I've been particularly engaged in having these conversations with practitioners, meaning teachers and principals, with those who are affected, meaning our students and their families, with school district directors who, in our spirit of local control, are the most locally responsible for trying to ensure equitable education, which is the constitutional right under the state constitution of every child within our borders. I do want to talk about how important it is to recognize that we not discuss challenges that we are facing right now as deficits that are assigned to our students or their families because they are of certain they belong to a certain community, because they present particular behavioral or other cognitive disabilities, or because they're poor. I think that that is the wrong way to approach education. Every child comes to school with their own unique aspirations, with their own unique aptitudes, and most importantly, with their own unique assets. And that's what we need to harness. My opponent did talk about the digital divide, which we are talking about. It is something that we need to cross jurisdictional boundaries. If the state alone would not be able to pay for the digital infrastructure, we need the support of our federal government. But we also do have a responsibility within the state to try and address that. I do also want to talk about social and emotional health. I was on a call earlier today with school district directors, and we have got to address the issue of trauma that is preventing our students from blossoming.
And Dane, any follow-up?
No, that's great. That's great.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. DuPree, Rick, your first question, and your question will initially be directed to candidate Stafford.
Okay, great. Thank you. First question, you talked about your 4 priorities, but really I'm curious, what are the top, say, 3 to 5 issues that you've heard from community members that you will also focus on if you are elected?
Okay, so certainly a top issue in our community is climate change. And we're seeing the downsides of disagreeing with science or not taking action with respect to science with COVID, and with very damaging, very concerning impacts. And we're going to see the same thing in climate change if we don't take that seriously. So that's a central issue of my campaign. It's going to be difficult for that issue to gain traction as much as it should in the upcoming legislative session, because there will be focus on the pandemic, which is good, homelessness, which is good, K-12 education, et cetera. But it needs to remain a key issue. So I'm advocating for high priority or high impact, low cost programs. Amongst those would be declaring a climate emergency in Washington state, passing the Clean Fuels Act, which requires transportation fuels to have a lower percentage of carbon content, instituting mandatory climate change curriculum in all of our schools statewide, banning the purchase of new internal combustion engine vehicles. So high impact proposals, these have all been introduced before but haven't passed, to try to make very significant progress on climate change. So that's the first. Second, austerity budget, that has to be avoided. We tried that in the aftermath of the Great Recession, 2007 to 2009. It led to painful cuts in the state's welfare program, TANF, painful cuts to foster care, painful cuts to affordable housing, tuition increases. So we need to avoid that at all costs, which we can do by tapping into the state's rainy day reserve fund, by instituting new taxation, and by a hiring freeze. And then the final thing is tax reform. We have the most regressive tax system in the country. That needs to change, and it needs to change right now, both to make the tax system less regressive and to deal with the state budget. Thank you very much.
And of course, Ms. Santos, same question. Would you like the question repeated?
No, but thank you for asking. I want to begin by saying there's an overarching value that needs to be addressed in the things that I'm hearing most from my constituents, and that is a clarion call for equity. And I think in the circumstances that we find ourselves today, with both the pandemic exposing great weaknesses in our economic system, as well as the horrific experiences of Black and Brown people because of historical and institutional racism, the three things that I need to focus on, honestly, from my constituents' point of view, is real police accountability. We cannot be arrested simply for walking down the street based on the way we look. 2, economic opportunities. We have got to dismantle the discriminatory practices and policies that exist not only in the private sector, but in the public sector as well, that prevent our people from getting jobs and getting contracts. And finally, child care. Because people of color are disproportionately essential workers, we are always forced to choose between, do we stay at home and take care of our kids, or do we go to work and bring home whatever money we can to support our families? But again, those are three issues that have an underlying foundation of work that is steeped in true equity.
You have about 20 seconds left. Do you want to forfeit the rest of your time?
Sure. Or I could go back and talk about the first question, but yeah, I'm done.
Okay. Any follow-up, Mr. DuPree?
I do for Mr. Stafford, and I appreciate you gave us your top initiatives, and I heard that again. Are those the things that you're hearing from the people in the community, from your constituents?
30 seconds.
Yeah. And there's certainly a whole host of things that are important. Yes, climate change is critical to constituents, but I will add there's certainly other huge priorities. Addressing the affordable housing, gentrification crisis is huge. Addressing homelessness is huge. And in addition to police reform, it's important to get at underlying racial inequities, such as huge differences in the percentage of kids on free and reduced lunch programs, depending on the socioeconomic conditions of the schools, which are disproportionate in the South.
That's time. Ms. Santos, you also, if you'd like to, you forfeited your other time, but again, if you'd like to comment on this, you have 30 seconds too, if you'd like to.
Thank you. No, let's move on to the next question. I'm just committed to equity and justice and opportunity.
Okay, Dane, once again, your next question, and this question will initially be directed to Ms. Santos.
Yeah, Representative Santos, gentrification is a worsening issue in the 37th district. Traditional Black and Brown communities are being pushed out of the Seattle area as more affluent groups move towards these more urban areas. What are your plans to use the levers of power to lessen the magnified impact this has on communities of color as they're being hollowed out by gentrification?
2 minutes.
Thank you very much. There are two approaches that I think we have to take to frankly create a barrier and disincentives to gentrification. And unfortunately, this gentrification is something that I saw beginning many, many years ago in the International District and in the Pioneer Square, when we needed to have those stadiums. We knew that that was going to trample over an historic, valuable cultural community, getting squeezed by the entertainment district created by the stadiums, getting squeezed from the march further south by downtown Seattle. I also knew at some point that people were definitely going to be looking at the central area because of the opportunities that existed there to buy property in an inexpensive way and then to develop it. That's one of the reasons why I felt it was very important that we created community preservation and development authorities that specifically said the state had a role in helping to facilitate the gentrification of these areas. We should have a role in making sure that we protect those properties. So creating organizations like the Community Preservation and Development Authority, which I have done. But the other piece as well is making sure that we are building equity into important statewide policies like the growth management plan. And I'm working right now with folks to ensure that equity and diversity is a component of the growth management plan, which is the overall framework for each county developing comprehensive plans, which is the basis for cities and sub areas like Skyway for developing sub area plans and elevating equity within that planning system.
And candidate Stafford, same question. Would you like the question repeated?
I don't think so. I'm ready to go. And I'll say that I'll address 4 things. First is zoning changes. We need to increase density in the downtown areas like South Lake Union, et cetera, to ameliorate the pressure for gentrification in areas like the Central District, Columbia City, Hillman City, Skyway, et cetera. And there's different ways to do that. I support accessory dwelling units and detached accessory dwelling units, the so-called backyard cottages, where we can add living facilities into the backyards and single-family zoned lots. That adds to density, that adds to housing opportunities that again will relieve the pressure, some of the pressure on gentrification. Similarly, I support the housing affordability and livability agenda, HALA. This provides developers with more height to build, which adds density, which is good. But in return, they're required to provide units of affordable housing. Yes, there are many issues here. You don't want the money to go into funds that then build the housing elsewhere and exacerbate gentrification. So it needs to be managed correctly, but nevertheless, it's a good policy. Second sort of realm, we need to build more affordable housing, Seattle Housing Authority, the King County Housing Authority, the State Housing Authority, and even at the federal level, Section 8 housing vouchers, we need more of those. There's 2 things underway that are very positive. The King County has just launched the Health Through Housing Initiative to build $400 million of additional housing. And the state, Frank Chop, Representative Chop, is proposing a new tax to increase funding for affordable housing and homelessness. So that's critical. Third, we have land trusts like the Africatown Land Trust that's building affordable housing, which is very positive. And the final thing that we need to start thinking about is rent control, not in traditional models, which haven't worked well, but Oregon earlier this year passed a rent control bill.
That's time.
7.8% plus inflation.
That's time.
It's good to look at. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll continue to move forward. Mr. DuPree, your next question, and it will initially be directed towards Representative Santos.
Okay, thank you very much. The pandemic, as we know, has had a significant impact on communities of color and small businesses in those communities in particular. What do you propose to help stimulate the economy for the average individual and the average family in these communities in particular?
2 minutes.
Thank you very much. It is a blessing as well as a curse that this pandemic has finally exposed for everyone to see just how great, how deep, and how long-lived the institutional racism has and how it has affected our communities of color. We have to do many things to undo generations, decades, and centuries, frankly, of underinvestment in the human development of our communities of color. So from education in the K-12 system to making sure we're creating targeted dollars for helping to ensure that we have more teachers of color in our system, so that our young people can grow up to realize I can be a teacher and feel good about that. We have to be able to make sure that we are supporting our small businesses that are part of our ecosystem. I talked about childcare earlier. Many of our childcare providers are small businesses that are owned by people of color. And we need to be able to make sure that as we are delegating out public dollars, that we are creating criteria that identify our small businesses as our key essential businesses. And finally, I think the last piece that we need to do is to make sure that just as we would want to have our students have a broad variety of supports that allow them to be successful in school, we need to surround our families with the kinds of supports that allow them to be successful workers and successful families. And so targeted dollars based on criteria that identify equity and opportunity as key goals.
That's time. Mr. Candidate Stafford, same question. Would you like the question repeated?
Please.
Mr. DuPree.
Okay. The pandemic has had a significant impact on communities of color and small businesses in those communities in particular. What do you propose to help stimulate the economy for the average individual and the average family in those communities?
Okay. So I'll address that with several proposals. The first and foremost, it's imperative to take every measure necessary to enable people to stay in their homes and not become homeless. So I support rent relief for individuals in need. I support eviction moratoriums. I support subsidized utilities, both through Seattle City Light and Seattle Public Utilities. I support food assistance programs. All of these will enable people, help people stay in their housing, which is imperative, both from a public health perspective, of course, but also from an economic perspective. If people lose their houses, they become homeless, they become less employable. So it's easy to move into a vicious cycle that needs to be stopped at all costs. Second, there needs to be assistance for business, and the state is doing some good things here. So for example, we have a shared work program where a small business can contract with the state. It's similar to the federal Paycheck Protection Program, which is expired. But in any case, the state will pay part of the payroll costs for a business to enable the business to continue to employ its employees. This is a great program. It needs to be expanded. In addition to that, we've established a Washington business group. Jay Inslee just instituted this business recovery group in order to provide sort of a one-stop location for small businesses to find out the various forms of assistance that are available to them, which are many. So some good things are happening. One thing that hasn't happened that needs to happen, the state has a very regressive business tax where we tax based on revenues, not profits, which means unprofitable businesses still need to be taxed. So that needs to be changed. And then the final thing I will note is there's some good things happening from nonprofit groups on flu vaccinations, et cetera, which are contributing against the pandemic. Thank you.
Mr. DuPree, any follow-up?
No, they covered it. Thank you both very much.
Okay, we are going to go to break, and when we come back, again, Candidate Stafford, you will have the opportunity to ask a question first of your opponent, Representative Santos. You will have 15 seconds to ask the question, and then there will be a 1-minute response, and then a 30-minute opportunity for rebuttal. Before we go to break, I'd like to make sure and once again thank our sponsors, Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, and also Seattle Academy of Arts and Sciences for powering these discussions and debates, interviews, and forums that we've been having. We'll be back in a couple of minutes to continue.
This is Paul Pearson, host of Star Time, and when I'm not meeting Mrs. Jones in that cafe for a chat, and nothing else, I'm listening to RainierAvenueRadio.world.
This could be the most important 30 seconds of the year. That's how long we have to convince you that you have power. Want change in your local community? Vote. Tired of government not working for you? Vote. Done with people saying nothing can be done? Vote. Finished with protests falling on deaf ears? Vote. Fed up with elected officials' empty promises? Reclaim your power and vote them out. You can't win if you don't play, and will never win if you don't vote. For more info, go to reclaimyourvote.org.
Brought to you by your local urban league.
This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio. The regional and local chapters of the NAACP are calling for the Seattle School Board to terminate Superintendent Denise Juneau's contract. They say she has failed to make progress on their demands for racial equality, mandatory and district-wide ethnic studies classes, and more engagement with Black families. They also say the district lost a number of Black men in leadership positions since Juneau assumed the role, and that it had dropped the ball on reaching students of color during the pandemic. Per the Seattle Times, Juneau's contract already includes stipulations that she must make progress toward a number of goals, including that 100% of African-American boys meet state standards for literacy. Studies show marginal improvement during her term. And that's your news on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Rainier Avenue Radio presents All Music, All Day Saturday. Music, all day Saturday.
This is Edwin Bailey, Bulldog Blues.
Jazz from the cabinets.
That's right. It's time once again for Jazz from the Cabinets with Big Poppy.
Star Time.
Thanks for tuning in. My name is Paul Pierce.
This is Star Time.
Saturdays, all music, all day. Reggae Hour. K-Fox Night.
Looking for the perfect beat? Yeah, it's the beat of the Fox.
Fresh Juice with D-Money in the group.
Myself, D-Money.
Nice Eyes Patron.
Taylor Hart.
This is Spencia, the Northwest Rap Game.
DJ Medina. Chad Cheddar. Northwest Rap Game.
Sergio LaCour's Love Line.
It's Sergio's Love Lines with Sergio LaCour. Go to the phone line. Tell her who we talking.
Sea Monster Radio. Mo Jams is your jam.
We're live. Welcome to Mo Jam Mondays. This is KZ of KZ Music Media. Caller Goddess for Mo Jam Mondays.
Just my opinion. God is inspiration. Music. All day and all night. Saturdays on RainierAvenueRadio.world.
You're listening to RainierAvenueRadio.world.
Welcome back to RainierAvenueRadio.world, our community election connection. Engage and Activate 2020. This debate is for the 37th Legislative District Representative Position 1. Candidates are incumbent Sharon Tomiko Santos and the challenger John Stafford. Our moderators are Dane, Sherman, and Rick DuPree. We'll get to our moderators here pretty quickly. Again, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle and Seattle Academy of Arts and Sciences. This is the part where there's an opportunity for the candidates to engage each other. And candidate Stafford, you have 15 seconds to ask a question of Representative Tomiko Santos.
Okay, and I'll just note that I don't intend this as a challenge of my opponent, but rather to bring up a topic that isn't brought up that I think should be. There has been much discussion earlier this year on a possible special session that hasn't happened yet. I'm just curious about your thoughts about whether we should have or should move into a special session before the 2021 session. Thank you.
1 minute.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. And I fell on the side of being an advocate for a special session. I wished we had had a special session in June because I think that at least based on the fiscal forecast at that time, we had the opportunity to make the cuts less harmful and to try and address the revenue issue at that point. That obviously didn't come to pass. A November special session is unlikely. And so the good news is that the September fiscal forecast showed, as you well know, that the shortfall was not as significant as we had thought it would be back in the springtime.
10 seconds.
But it clearly will require a lot of attention when we go back in 2021 to address the biennial budget.
And candidate Stafford, you have 30 seconds.
And is this in the form of a question to my?
No, this is just an opportunity to say whatever you'd like to say in response to what Representative Santos just said.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I will just add that I also believe that we should have been in a special session because there are so many issues that need to be addressed, that are urgent, and I think it is somewhat undesirable, or actually quite undesirable, to treat this as sort of a normal circumstance and then go to Olympia as if we're going to be able to address all these issues.
10 seconds.
And then finally, I think we're going to have, consistent with this, less legislative capacity to deal with all these issues because there's going to have to be a lot of legislative work over Zoom. So,
and Representative Santos, you have 15 seconds to ask a question of candidate Stafford.
Yes, thank you very much. There's no question, John, that you have been very much engaged in the Democrat Party for the 37th Legislative District, as well as with the climate change organizations. I'm curious to know what is the depth and extent of your experience working with communities of color?
1 minute.
Okay, thank you. So I'll answer that in three ways. First, as I've discussed previously, I have worked for 15 years full-time as a substitute teacher in Seattle schools. And so I have a considerable amount of experience working with lower income students, communities of color. In a number of these assignments, I showed up on the first, second, or third day of school and was asked to teach for a full year at the school. So I've worked for a full year at Rainier Beach High School. I worked for a full year at Cleveland High School teaching mathematics. I worked for a full year at Franklin High School teaching, amongst other things, web page design, a full year at Aki Middle School teaching Spanish, and a full year at Orca at Whitworth also teaching mathematics. In addition to all that experience in the K-12 world, I was the treasurer for Arts in Motion, an organization that provided subsidized music lessons to underprivileged youth. And I've also worked as an umpire in youth leagues.
That's time.
Thank you very much.
And Representative Santos, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. And I appreciate that explanation by my opponent. I guess I'm curious to know, though, what type of organizational partnerships, what kind of boards have you sat on that are working on the issues of housing or civil rights that you had suggested you work on?
And that's where we're going to leave it. You can take some of your next time to answer that if you choose to, but we're going to move on. And our candidates, again, we will have 1 minute now so that we can get more questions in. Dane, we will start with you, and your question will initially be directed toward candidate Stafford.
Awesome. Okay, so Mr. Stafford, young people are the future of our district and our world. Young people have increasingly been empowered by how badly they think that older generations have messed up our planet and our political environment. How do you see your role as a state legislator to speak to those younger generations and work towards leaving them a better community going forward?
1 minute.
Okay, so I see a lot of this as a teacher. I've had a number of my students say, we view the problems as being your fault, not our fault. And then when you stand up and say that it's imperative that the younger generation, starts to take action on these, we sort of, we hear you, and that's important. But we see that sort of through jaundiced eyes because the problems came from your generations, and these are certainly valid criticisms. So as a state legislator, there's a few things I'd like to do. First of all, as I've discussed previously, I'd like to see differential investment in our state schools based on socioeconomics. We do a little bit of that now through the 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act, a little bit through LAP, but not enough. I think there should be significantly higher investment levels per pupil in spending for K-12. For lower income areas, we also need to have relevant curriculum for lower income communities and better integration between K-12.
And that's time.
Thank you.
And Representative Santos, same question. Would you like the question repeated?
No, but thank you very much for asking. Lucas or Sherman, thank you for asking that question. I have to tell you, I was laughing inside. Because I still think of myself, and Ricky, you know this as well, I still think of myself as the young person, and the generation that we're battling are our parents. So it's this new awareness that I am that generation that young people are targeting. I have to tell you that this summer in particular, with all of the movements, Black Lives Matter, the social movements, the anti-brutality movements, I really see the generational rift. And that's why the last event that I had as a fundraiser for my campaign was featuring an intergenerational conversation between activists. I had a Black Panther and
10 seconds.
a feminist talking with a young Latinx and another young Asian Pacific Islander about what is it that the generations
that's
agree
time.
on and disagree on.
And did I just hear Ricky? Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
That's okay. Anybody that's known me for a long time, you know.
Okay, Ricky. Mr. DuPree. Your next question and your next question will initially be directed towards candidate Stafford.
Thank you. And I would like to make a quick comment for candidate Stafford, just to know, in answering the question from Sharon Tomiko Santos, you mentioned when she asked you about communities of color, you initially said you've worked with lower income and communities of color. And I just want you to know, as a Black man, that comes across as the impression that all communities of color are lower income. And that's a perception that you just need to be aware of and can be offensive.
You know, I do want to make sure that we get to the questions and less commentary.
Yes,
so we get the questions from the candidates.
I felt that had to be said.
That way we don't show any deference to either candidate.
Yes. With that said, the largest voting bloc in 2016 at 100 million people on a national level for the presidential campaign was those that didn't vote. What would you say to those individuals that say, my vote doesn't matter and it doesn't make a difference?
1 minute.
Okay, thank you very much. And I appreciate your prior comment. So thank you for that. With respect to voting, the thing that I would basically just disagree, and I would go back to 2000 and I would talk about how different our world would be today if Al Gore had defeated George W. Bush. And I would also go back to 2016, which was razor thin electorally, and talk about how different our world would be if Hillary Clinton had defeated Donald Trump. And if both of those things had happened, I mean, it's hard to imagine just how significant that would be. So I think it's critical to emphasize those things. And it's also, of course, important to make the observation that if each person makes every decision based on what happens to, the actual impact of that act, you end up with a society where not enough's happening. So I would also emphasize the importance of each person doing what they should do.
That's time.
Amalgamate to a better overall decision. Thank you.
Representative Santos, same question. Would you like the question repeated?
No, but thank you very much. The question of apathy is the question that you are asking, and it's one that is understandable, particularly if you are a person of color, if you are an immigrant, if you are poor, because our government has engaged on multiple levels of putting people in hiding because of their immigrant status, of creating modern forms of poll taxing because of LFOs, of just creating a climate and despair around whether or not our vote counts. I agree with my opponent that one only has to look at the last 4 years and say, is this what you want to perpetuate for the next 4 years, for yourself,
10 seconds,
for your parents, for your children, for God's sakes? This is not, I really believe the upward movement, uprising of voices is because of the last 4 years.
And Dane Lucas Sherman. Dane, your next question will be directed initially towards Representative Santos. 1 minute after the question.
Okay, so Representative Santos, I lost my dad to the opioid epidemic when I was 8 years old, and my mom to suicide when I was 12. Which makes mental health and behavioral health a huge issue for me and a lot of people in our district. While there have been significant investments in mental health over the past couple of years through the state legislature, they have also been they're still woefully underfunded, especially considering COVID-19 and the huge tsunami of behavioral health needs that are coming up. what are you going to build on the investments over the past couple of years, and what are you going to do to address the mental health crisis in our midst?
1 minute.
Thank you. Clearly, that's a very large question. Let me start by saying I'm very sorry for you and your loss, and also to acknowledge that mental health issues are not something to be ashamed of. And that is an important piece for me to call out, because I think because of the stigmatization of mental health, people don't get the help that they need, or they don't seek the help that they need, and that leads them to risk-taking behaviors like substance abuse and like suicide. And like you, I have had family members commit suicide. What we really need to do is so large and so broad. I would like to just focus on one small part that I can be very specific about, and that is making sure that the mental health needs of our students and our staff in schools are addressed. They are our families are facing great trauma.
And Candidate Stafford, would you like the question repeated?
Nope, I think I'm all set. Thank you.
1 minute.
Okay, so first of all, the state is changing its mental health delivery model from one based on centralized institutions in Spokane and sort of near DuPont, Lake Ridge, to one that's based on a community model. And I fully support that and would like to see that transition accelerated. The pandemic is, of course, exacerbating all sorts of mental health problems, from domestic abuse, addiction, etc. So we do need more investments here. And that, of course, speaks to the fact that in the upcoming budget negotiations in Olympia, again, we can't resort to austerity, which will lead to cuts here instead of increased investments. And then the final thing I'll say is, you know, from a broader perspective, is that this all demonstrates the need for universal single-payer health care in Washington State, which I support. We can't have people losing health care, mental health care services as they lose their jobs. So we need to move to a universal health care model.
And Mr. DuPree, your question initially directed towards Representative Santos.
Yes, thank you. My question is, the current political climate is extremely polarized. What can you do to reinforce or refocus, I should say, or make sure that we refocus on what's in the best interest of the people instead of what appears to be a blind loyalty to party, regardless of what is in the best interest of the community?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. You know, I think one of the things that's really important to recognize is pragmatism is what gets things done. And ideological approaches are part of what alienates people. You have to come together and say, can we find a common problem that we can work together to solve? If we don't both agree on what the problem is, we'll never agree on what the solution is. I'm very proud that one of the things that I've done as an education chair is I've insisted that my committee members work in a collaborative, bipartisan fashion, because I believe deeply education is not a partisan issue. We must all work together because these are all our children. I would continue to try and model that behavior and to insist on that behavior, but also to work with our advocates.
Wow.
Am I blinking? Am I blinking?
You are blinking.
I don't know why. Can somebody help me? I feel like I'm on Star Trek.
I'm not sure why that's happening. If it is on our end, I'm sure that Mr. Bellis will get hard work on it.
Yeah, maybe if you try getting rid of the virtual background.
Yeah, that's probably what it is.
That will help.
Okay.
I would like to say, wow, and what a great job by our moderators, Dane, Lucas, Sherman, and Rick DuPree. Fantastic job. Thank you.
I don't think I had a chance to answer the last question. I don't know if that's
you're absolutely right. I'm sorry, Mr. Stafford. Would you like the question repeated?
No, I think I understand it. It's about polarization. And so I'm going to offer just a slightly different perspective on this. There are many times and many issues where, in my view, the appropriate approach is bipartisanship, trying to find common ground, etc. So that applies to many issues and many eras. But there's also times where things become clear that one side's on the right side of history and one side is on the wrong side of history. And I think we're in one of those times, at least on some of the issues of our day. Climate change. 98% of climate scientists say that this is an emergency that needs to be dealt with immediately. On racial justice, it's clear that we have a racial justice problem in this country that needs to be addressed. I don't think that there's really two credible sides on that. Tax reform, we have the highest income inequality in the history of the country, and yet we're giving tax cuts at the federal level to affluent people. So I think this is a time when, at least on some of the central issues of our time,
that's time.
Party has to prevail. So thank you.
And again, my apologies, candidate Stafford. Now, thank you to our moderators, Dane, Lucas, Sherman, and Rick DuPree. Again, wonderful job. Fantastic, and thank y'all for doing what you're doing. I needed to make sure that we have time for our final comments here. And again, thanks to our sponsors, the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, along with Seattle Academy of Arts and Sciences. We've had Washington State Supreme Court Justice debates, Position 6 and Position 3. We've had candidate forums, Black candidate forums from Pierce County, from King County, from Snohomish County. We've done a United States Representative Congressional debate for District 2, a United States Representative debate for District 9. And tomorrow we'll be having our Superior Court Justice debate for Position 13, and then also the pro and con debate for Referendum 90. Those will be at 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock, or maybe it's 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock. It's on our website. We've been done a number of these things. And then quickly, again, I want to thank Dane and Taylor Corrine, who are leading our effort for the Student Election Connection. We have our curriculum of workshops embedded in certain high schools across the state, where we are teaching youth, particularly 16 and 17, about voter importance, voter awareness, how voter suppression works, just a number of different things. They're learning about the candidates' offices and what they do. And we will be having roundtable discussions from those students a little later in November, following the election. And we'll see what happens after this election. So as we get ready to go here, it's time for closing statements. And candidate Stafford, you will be going first, as Representative Santos won the coin flip and deferred. And so you are now on the clock. Your closing statement, 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you again for hosting tonight's forum. I've appreciated being a part of it. We confront 5 concurrent crises: the pandemic, the crisis of the economic recession, the pending budget crisis in Olympia, climate change, and the demands for racial justice. It's important to see these crises, yes, as extremely challenging, but also as an opportunity. The appropriate approach is not to view these as short-term problems that we can quickly fix with Band-Aid solutions, but instead they represent an opportunity to be pursued in a meaningful way to start to restructure various dimensions of our society. Consistent with that, we need bold structural change, not just incremental reforms. And indeed, that's the slogan of my campaign. I have a very broad background, which I've discussed. I have a high level of involvement in our community, in the schools, as an author, on policy, with the 37 District Democrats, with Arts in Motion, a nonprofit organization, with climate change advocacy. And I have a compelling platform that focuses on progressive change, perhaps most notably climate change and tax reform, which are both very much needed, and avoiding austerity. So I'm a substantive candidate. I'm highly informed, I'm highly involved, and I'm highly progressive. My name's John Stafford. I ask for your support, and you can learn more about my candidacy at staffordforstaterepresentative.org. Thank you again for hosting the forum and for having me tonight.
All right, thank you, candidate Stafford. And Representative Sharon Tomiko Santos, opportunity now for you to deliver your closing statement. You will have 2 minutes, and you are now on the clock.
Thank you so much. I very much appreciate this opportunity to spend time with all of you and to respond to your questions. I want to communicate to all of your listeners how proud I am to represent you and our diverse communities in Olympia. I am the only candidate in this race who authentically and deeply understands and knows the histories and communities of the 37th district, because I am you. Your values are my values. Your views are my views. Your priorities are my priorities. As your state representative, I've been privileged to lead many legislative efforts focusing on things such as equity in education. I helped create, and I still serve on, the Educational Opportunity Oversight and Accountability Committee, the only statutory committee that is designed to review policies for the impact on our communities of color. Our omnibus legislation led the nation in dismantling discipline from our students and prohibiting it, and making sure that school districts did not delink our students from their constitutional right. We also were very involved in creating opportunities for workers and small businesses. I have been the lead champion on dismantling and repealing Initiative 200 since it was passed in 1998, the same year I was elected. I have tried over the years to create alternative ways for our minority-owned businesses to gain access to public contracts, which are lucrative, important stepping stones for building our businesses. And finally, I have been a leader on ensuring justice for all. I've grown up in the 37th district to know that Black Lives Matter, and I ask for your support in November.
Again, thank you to both of you, candidate John Stafford and the incumbent, Representative Sharon Tomiko Santos. Thank you for both taking the time to come here and share this information with our community. Once again, it's your vote. Now you have heard from the candidates for the 37th Legislative District position number 1. What aligns with your values? What aligns with your issues? Who aligns with your concerns? It's your vote, and it does matter. It does count. And if you're thinking about, well, the presidential election, your vote's going to have more impact on these down ballot candidates. This is where you can really impact your community. So you will be able to, in about 30 minutes, go back over and listen to this again, and then we'll on Facebook and YouTube, and then we'll have it back streaming again on the air. You'll be able to hear again. I'm not sure what time, but on Mondays, just in case you need to once again have a refresher before you finally cast your ballot. And one more again, thanks Dane, Lucas Sherman. Thank you, Dane. And also thanks to our sports director, who you can hear on Mondays at 6:30 with Dupe and Edwin Bailey. Dupe, thank you, my man.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And thank you to both candidates, and Tony doing a great job for the community. Thank you very much.
All right. And you know I got to slip this in, Ricky.
All right, we'll talk off here, son.
Again, we will be back with 2 debates tomorrow for R90, Referendum 90, and then the Superior Court, or Superior Court Justice Position 13. That's it. That's all the time that we're going to have. We'll turn you now back over to our regularly scheduled programming, and enjoy. Thank you for joining us. And one more again, a big shout out to our sponsors, Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle and Seattle Academy of Arts and Sciences. We're out.
Thank you.